Our guest today, as you can probably already tell, does not fit the preconceived image of the polar explorer. Blonde and bubbly, a mother of 4 children, including triplets. She also happens to be a world record holding polar explorer and described by the Times as living proof that humans really can reach new peaks. Anne Daniels, besides being an extraordinary polar explorer, is also an unlikely blonde. And no offense to blondes out there, I am one myself, just, but this one has brains, for her role of polar explorer has comfortably evolved and matured into one of a more scientific and environmental bent, with her recent expeditions being dedicated to helping scientists research the effects of global warming. You started your unlikely career path, Anne, without any outdoor experience whatsoever, a bit like me, brought up on a council estate in Bradford, and pure hard work, grit and determination got you to being to the giddy levels that you have reached, starting with a selection of some 300 other women, myself included. And I wanted to bring that into the introduction because that's where our stories together begin and start interweaving as rank, bumbling amateurs in the world of polar exploration. Your first expedition, which is what the selection was for, along with me, was a relay over the frozen Arctic ice to the North Pole. Some of us after this decided that just wasn't enough, and we were smitten with the ice. And you and I were 2 of a team of other women, a small team of 5, who went then on to the South Pole. From there on and up for Anne, you initiated a North Pole expedition yourself of just 3 British women before attempting a solo bid on the North Pole. In all, and in conclusion, Anne has sledgehauled over 2,000 ice miles, completed over 10 polar expeditions. And all this despite occasionally having to contend with a blizzard of personal challenges on the home front too. So as an erstwhile teammate of my own on the ice, a very good friend, and a highly respected female polar pioneer, we're all on course for an hour of discovery, adventure, and perhaps the promise of a little bit of ice gossip between 2 polar teammates of all. I'm very excited to introduce you all to Anne Daniels.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm so pleased you said I was blonde, because right now I think that might have disappeared somewhat. I've embraced the grey with COVID, which I'm thrilled about. Saves me an absolute fortune, quite honestly.
I think you look very sophisticated.
Oh, wow. Well, it took me some time, but, you know.
It's a good haircut for polar expeditions as well. And talking of hairstyles, in case you hadn't noticed, everyone, Anne, whilst being a mother of 4 and not exactly butch, I happen to know also loves a good party. So it would be fascinating to travel back a bit, Anne, to your grass roots and try and find out what it is that sent you on this trajectory of polar exploration.
I think, and it's an interest in where we all come from and how paths take us in directions we never thought or imagined. So yeah, I was born on a council estate in Bradford, and I loved it. It was a great community. You know, we didn't have a great deal of money, but we had enough. We had a roof and food, so it was a great upbringing. But I was the youngest child of 5 with 4 older brothers.
5.
So I know.
Did that make you quite competitive, actually?
Well, exactly that. And it wasn't so much that I wanted to beat them. I know what it was. It's because I was the little girl and the little sister. I wanted them to like me. It was about acceptance rather than competition for that sake. they were bigger than me, and they were always made to look after me, as you are growing up. And so it was, take a sister. She's not coming with us. That
Yeah.
kind of conversation. And so I didn't
Yeah.
want to be a bother. I wanted to run as fast, do all the things. And that turned into a competition, because then I was doing all the dares first, just so it
Mhm.
looked good. So
Mhm.
as
It's
much as I
quite
was never
interesting that, because you and I on polar expeditions that we've been on together, I noticed we almost raced each other to take on
yeah,
dares, didn't we? Who's going to cross that crevasse first?
who's going to volunteer? And it was always us two. There was, yes,
Yes.
I'll do it.
Yes.
And it was almost a fight to who would do it, rather than the standing back. And it was us two, for sure. It was us two.
It was always us two. Now, it's very interesting how you and I are very different paths of lives converged, because there you were with this upbringing, busy being a tomboy, and I was actually busy being a tomboy, but at the other end of the country. And how on earth did you come to hear about that selection course for the world's first women's expedition to the North Pole?
Well, so I think it's important at this point to say, I was also in a really difficult place. I had the triplets for only 18 months, but I was facing divorce. So I'm facing life on my own, and I didn't have a job. I gave it up to look after the children. I didn't have an income. And I was in one world of pain, a world of pain. And life looked really bleak. Sat on the front room floor. And actually, it's funny you should say that, because there was an advert in the newspaper. This is the picture of the advert, all these unlikely women, and it asked for ordinary people to apply to be the first, part of the first all women's team to walk to the North Pole. And even though I had no experience, I I just thought, oh, well, first I didn't. I put it away and discounted myself. Don't be ridiculous. All those inner conversations we have. And then I thought, this could be my opportunity to do something. And if I'm honest, it wasn't to go to the North Pole, it was to find some self worth and to
Mm.
just do the selection. That was it, no more. And so I saw that advert, I was shown it, and I applied. I was frightened.
Yes.
It's not that I didn't feel the fear, but I felt the fear and applied anyway. And that's how I heard about it.
And that is actually a reflection on all the challenges you've undertaken, is that you've always done it despite the fear, which surely is the true definition of courage, I think, isn't it?
That is it. And people will sort of say, oh, you're brave for being on the ice and those things. But actually, it wasn't that,
Mm,
isn't it? Was the
mm,
fear of
mm.
actually trying something new and then doing it anyway. That, I think, is where courage comes in. And that doesn't matter who you are, whether it's going for a new job, whether it's, trying a new skill, or just having a new hobby,
Well,
or joining a group of people.
yes,
Doesn't
and
matter.
when you joined this lot, which put the fear of God up me too, is they all seem to be, talking of skills, they all seem to be sort of experienced yompers, campers, what have you, had all the right gear.
They were. Everything I had, I'd borrowed from the army, which is also quite amusing in hindsight. I had some military friends. I wasn't in the military. I didn't have anything. And all my friends lent it to me. So when I turned up for that first selection, you're right. We turned up on Dartmoor, and it was all boggy, and all these women had the right kit. But they were afraid of me for about 2 seconds, because they thought I was an army officer with all my green kit. After about 2 seconds, they went, oh, okay, she doesn't know what she's doing. She's rubbish.
She's one of us.
She's one of us. Well, I might have been one of you. I'm not sure I was one of the really hardy type.
Well, actually, it's interesting, because I do remember how well you got on with everyone. And the key things that were being looked for on this selection course, as I recall it, was actually not the requisite skills, because one can always be taught that, which is the approach they took. It was more to do with the courage, and it was a lot to do with resourcefulness and team spirit as well. And I think that maybe because as a mother of triplets, you were used to contending with all sorts of challenges.
I'll tell you, I do know why I stood out in the end up, because if you remember, there were 2 selections. The
Yeah.
first one was a couple of days, and I couldn't do it. I was in pain and real pain. I couldn't read a map. I'd never had a rucksack on my back. And I was in a lot of pain and I couldn't do anything and I was hopeless. But they gave us 9 months to go back for the final selection and anybody could go. Truly, Rosie, I spent 9 months. I was either looking after babies or I was training, I was learning a skill. So actually, when I went back in 9 months' time, you're right with everything you've said. I wasn't the best, but I had improved so much that now I was strong enough to do whatever they asked. And I trained so hard, I could also still chat. I didn't find it tough at all. And I think it was the mindset, the change. Not because I was the best, but because I put the work in, they knew I could be relied on, and I had those team skills that you were talking about.
And I think that actually, preparing for these expeditions, all that training, whether it's the skills and the physical training, it builds you up in every sense, doesn't it? Because it builds you up physically, but it builds you up mentally and spiritually, because you realize you feel more like sort of superwoman. Yeah, I can do this. I can take what's thrown at me, whereas you felt sort of vulnerable and without a suit of armor before.
I agree, and people say, "Oh, what's the difference between men and women?" But I think that first expedition being women was what gave me the courage to apply, and then the comradeship between us all. I will never forget on that final selection, and we were at Nuns Cross Farm, and I'm scrabbling around because somebody had given me army rations free to go, and you came around, I'm sure, and you were offered me, you didn't know me from Adam, and there was a lot of people there, and you were so generous, and you offered me flapjack that you'd bought in Harvey Nicks.
Rocket fuel. Oh.
What Harvey Nicks but I was impressed with your generosity. What got me is it didn't matter who you were, where your background came from. Nobody was judging anybody or looking down on anybody. We just all came together. And I think the people that did it well were the people that didn't judge and that just helped each other and left their ego at the door.
And I tell you another interesting thing, it was that during that final selection, I think you and I both knew intuitively who the other girls were going to be, who were going to be on the team. You just knew. And I think it's because maybe one becomes much more intuitive when you know that you're going to have to quite possibly allow them to have your life in their hands and vice versa.
That's right, because if you think in those days, or at the beginning rather than in those days, in those days, we had no knowledge of what we were going to face. We didn't have the skills to cross a moving skin of ice.
And there weren't very many people who could tell us, frankly.
No, so we were just trusting that we were going out to the very top of the world, and we had to trust that these people, that we weren't going to die. It was about that.
And in fact, if you think of, there you go, you were in Bradford and then you set off carving out the time to make yourself get on that team. You got on that team and then suddenly you arrive in the Inuit settlement high in the Arctic Circle of Resolute. Wham, what a contrast. What did you think when you first set eyes on the sea ice, the frozen ocean?
Well, I think it's important to sort of, if you will, so number one, I think it's really important to say by then I'm on my own and I wouldn't have been able to do it if my parents hadn't moved into my house. So I'm gonna give them a shout out because I had to have the children looked after. Then when we went up, there were two things. When I walked off the plane at Resolute Bay or stepped off it, I took a deep breath. My lungs felt like they were going to crack. The hairs of my nose froze, and I had never experienced that cold. And I first panicked. I just ran to the airport door because it was so shocking and frightening.
Very intimidating.
Oh, yes. But then we spent about a week in Resolute Bay acclimatizing and learning how to ski. I never skied and all those skills. But it's a good question. When we flew out to Wardhunt Island, which was our starting point, the last bit of land, and I saw the Arctic Ocean, oh, wow. It just is the most dynamic and beautiful environment. I was blown away. I'd only ever seen Bradford. As you know, the ice is different colours. You think it's just going to be white, but there's blues and there's pinks, and where the sun glints on it, it just is. And it moved, so there was sound. It blew me away, and I just thought I had found the most beautiful environment in the world. And when thick ice, meters deep, broke and rose in front of your eyes, there are no words that I can describe how I felt, the honor, the privilege. It just blew my mind away,
isn't it? Because you have got the colors, as in your picture behind you, the extraordinary aquamarine blues, and you have got that noise as well. Can you explain a little bit to the people who are listening avidly to you exactly why, a little geography sort of interlude as to why it's noisy and where do these shapes come from?
Well, of course, we left from then it was known as the Northwest Territories of Canada, and now, thankfully, it's now known as Nunavut. But when you leave from there, the currents and the wind and the ice go towards land. So all the ice, as well as the movement and the currents, goes towards land. And as it hits the solid platform of land, it crushes and builds up into big pressure ridges. And of course, the ice isn't just absolutely full of ice. There's some water and cracks. So it also moves. And when it moves, the power of the ocean will break. And it will break the plates of ice. So they can break, and then it's on water. So they can rise up as they break. And then as well as the ridges as it goes towards land that you're always having to crawl over, where it's all crushed, you have the splits. So you get open water, you get thin ice, you get such a differing ice scape. Sometimes you can just see open water. And other times you've got huge areas of thick ice, and that's because it's the skin of ice on a moving body of water.
And you, on this expedition, because you were in the first leg of this extraordinary relay, you were on Alpha, but going out first, having been trained up, we have to give him a plug, Anne, by the wonderful Cumbrian Jeff Summers, unsung hero.
Oh, I love him with all my very heart.
Twinkly blue eyes. Hello, Jeff. Anyway, you were on the first leg, which great accolade, because it was arguably the toughest leg, because you were setting off at first light when the sun had just poked its nose over the horizon first time. So bitterly cold, the Arctic at her coldest, and also the pressure ridges, the big walls of ice you were describing, are at their highest. So how did you find it?
There were two things, so we didn't really see much of that. That is a photograph for later on. It was all ridges and tall ice, and it was tough. I mean, we were only on the ice 17 days, so now I know in hindsight the sledges weren't as heavy as an all the way expedition, but they were heavy. We had to carry all our kit.
Were?
I think they were under £200. But I would go to 150, something like that, 150 to 200, because we may not have had to carry so many days' food. I didn't go up to 200. You were carrying all your tent equipment, everything you needed to survive, besides your fuel, your food, everything you had to put in a sledge and drag it across a piece of ice that's uneven. And in the really cold temperatures, the ice, it wants to grab hold of the sledge. You don't get much glide, so you're
Mm,
pulling against friction.
mm,
Um, so there were two things. Yes, it was physically tough. On that expedition, I think the cold, it was about -30, -36. Don't know what wind chill was, but that's cold, and so you never get warm. You don't go to a hotel. We didn't have enough fuel to heat the tent up. We weren't. So that's 24 hours a day, and
yeah.
then you're pulling this sledge over ridges, and you felt the responsibility of, if we had failed on that first leg because we were all novices, it was a feeling that nobody else will get on here. That it's, we have to, number one, we have to prove that us as novices can do it. We've trained, we've got the skills. We had two guides, we weren't doing it alone, but then we have to do the best we can so that we can set up the next team. Because
Mm.
whatever you're doing in life, if you're working in teams, everybody counts, and if you all work to the best, then that's when success has its best chance. So
And in
it
fact, it
felt
was
that.
similar awful weight of responsibility on everyone's shoulders as they went through the relay. Because after you, everyone thought, God, we can't undo the good that
Yeah.
Team Alpha have done. And also, we sat on your shoulders, so to speak, in the sense that we did learn with each relay. So we learned from Team Alpha, and everyone, I might sort of cast your minds back to, this was 1996, 97. So first of all, those sledges were quite heavy because the kit was heavier, and also not all of it worked, did it, Anne?
No, and that's interesting that you say the kit was heavier. And even I think, wow, are we that old? We were using HF radio in
Yes.
that expedition. So we
Do we
had to
had to
put
mount
the,
skis up on top of
yeah,
each other and
and
stick
put
an
the
antenna
antennae
over the
up
top?
and the wires and click, click, click in the tent, and you know, Alpha calling. It was a rookery, wasn't it?
It was
And
a
it was
rookery, and we didn't have any
crackly.
of those snazzy space energy bars or anything
No.
like. Probably had Harvey Nichols flapjacks.
Yeah, you weren't on mine. That was a
Too bad.
mistake, wasn't
Yeah.
it? And then that was it. We were in, like, you know, old-fashioned rations, and our we had a point where our radio circuited, the battery circuited, and it didn't work. That was
Mm,
quite scary. We're in the middle of thousands of miles of moving ocean, and we have no comms.
mm.
Um, and then thankfully, Sue, who is on my leg, she's good at physics and all kinds of things. She tore the whole battery apart into the single cells, put it all back together again, and we had comms.
Wow,
That
because it's
was
an
good.
interesting point you've just brought up, that to paint the scene for everyone, this team of in total 20 women and the two guys were made up of extraordinary spectrum of people, in the sense of you know, Sue, who you just mentioned, she was a surgeon or became a surgeon. You had a farmer. We had a mother and daughter on one team. We had a air hostess, film financier, incredible mixture of people, all of whom were on the same level on the polar ice.
That's the interesting thing. You're right. There were captains of industry, and people who did what one would consider just an ordinary job, whatever that means. But we
Yeah.
do know what we mean.
And how did
Uh,
you find your own, within your own group? How did you find the team dynamics with such a diversity of people?
Do you know, it didn't, that's what I loved about it. When you got on the ice, it did not matter who you were, where you came from, whether you were rich, you were poor, whether you were clever or you weren't
Yeah.
clever,
Yeah.
again, whatever that means. But it was stripped back to who you were. And if you were a decent person, which thankfully we all were, and you put everything into it, that's how you got
Yes.
judged. And so we
And
all just got on well.
did you learn from that particular point? Did you learn anything? Because I know I certainly did, i.e., not to be judgmental. Well, it was a
A
bit of a shock to
million,
discover I had weaknesses.
a million. Mine was the opposite. It was, don't put yourself down. Don't feel you're not good enough. Because if you could imagine, when I first got involved, pretty much everybody had a different background to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
A high percentage went to private schools and a high percentage had really good
Yeah.
jobs.
Yeah.
And I think I was probably, it would not be unfair to say I was the only one that had been born on a council estate. And so to begin with, it took me a lot to feel comfortable and to feel good enough. I had a lot of insecurities from day one. And then I learned that I was really cross with myself.
Yeah.
Actually, that's wrong. And I've never felt like that since. I don't care who I'm with now. We are the same. And it's who that person is that I'm bothered about. Don't care
Yeah.
what they drive, what they wear, or their education.
Yes. And
That was my
everyone has
learning
their
point.
strengths and
Yeah,
weaknesses. And
everybody
did
has a
any of
skill.
those come to the fore insofar as were there any instance dramas like on Team Delta, which you could probably tell us about as well, the famous
Well,
triple immersion?
you say Team Delta because we were on the first leg, and I remember an incident. Well, we were went the ridges are high, so you can see them there, and we went around one that was like that had a thin ice by the side at the bottom of it, and so the guides Matty and Denise felt that if we all went in a single line and there was open water further to, well, we were skiing towards it, so to our right, that if we stayed close together, we could get round this ridge of ice. Not stayed close together, if we one behind the other. So one behind the other, definitely not close together because it was thinner ice. We could get round. And there was a point where I was third in the line and Matty had gone round the corner of a ridge this big. And then Jan was behind her. Claire followed her, and as Claire went round, they couldn't see me, obviously, because they've gone round the corner. Claire said, "My foot's gone through the ice. I think there's a problem." But of course, I was following Claire, and I saw the foot had gone through the ice. And I couldn't get out. I couldn't stop because the ice was too thin. I couldn't climb over the ridge. It was about that high. And there was that fear of, I'm going in. There is nothing I can do. I'm going in. And I
And that
went
would
in
mean going
myself.
into the drink. You're going into
Went
the
in the water,
deep Arctic Ocean.
straight through in this Arctic Ocean. I'm straight through. Unfortunately, Sue was behind me and then the final guide, Denise, and they were round another corner. So nobody could see me. It was like I was at the end of a place. And so I tried to get out. There was a little ledge, tried to get out, fell back in, tried to get out. And at the second time I fell back in and was in somewhat of a panic, and thought, right, try one more time and then maybe swim around. You're going to have to think of a different thing to do. Bear in mind, I've never done this before. I tried on the third and got out and sat on the shelf. But of course, then you're cold because you're wet, you're getting cold. And Sue put her head around the corner because she just thought I'd stopped. She could see the end of my sledge, but not me. Put her head around the corner and realised I was in trouble. I went, ah! So Denise came in and kind of shot around me and threw me a throw rope so I could get back to the team. It's all very dramatic, and I joined the team again. But then that was the odd thing. So I'm with them. I'm cold. I'm slightly traumatized, but I'm okay. And then we went into the routine that you have to do when you're wet, and that was to roll yourself in snow because it absorbs water. That was very counterintuitive. So I did that, and then Matty, who was the other guide, said, "You can either ski and try and get warm, or we can put the tent up." And I said, "Coming back to you and I, well, I'm not going to stop the team." So I just skied, and thankfully I started to get a little bit warmer. But we came across this area of really big open water where we had to stop anyway. Oh, I was so glad because we had
Yeah,
to stop, put the tent up. I could get dry. I didn't have to ask for it, and that was quite,
that's quite something
it was
because,
a tough thing to do.
well, you're talking about in temperatures in the -30s and being wet and cold. Interestingly, the water in the Arctic is only about -2 or -3. It's relatively toasty in comparison.
It was warm when I went in.
Yes, it's getting out that's the problem. And I'm I didn't know that this had happened to you. So it's very interesting because it's very similar and the way you dealt with it, to when I went through the ice on the Arctic myself on my own, and having to struggle to get out, by which time you are sodden,
Yes.
and you're heavier and you're cold, and my option was changing my socks and glove inner layers and keep on moving. But there was only me, so I could keep seamlessly moving to stay warm, whereas you were with a team, and until you stopped, you probably had to stop the wretched freezing cold 5-minute breaks.
Well, that's very sweet of you to say it's easy. It's easier on your own than with a team, but I've also been on my own. I'm been in on my own, and it's not easier because you've got to get yourself out.
Yes.
You haven't got
Yes.
friends who can
The ice
help
is
you
breaking.
change your socks and your gloves. It's terrifying. You're the only one there. So I had team friends. Denise threw me
Yes.
a rope,
Yes.
and I had people around me. When
And
you're on your own, you are on your own,
you're on
and
your own.
there's
And
nobody else to help you. That's worse.
it was that on your solo.
Yes.
Well, we're going to come to that, because the North Pole relay, thanks to the input from everyone, and certainly from you, Anne, was a triumph against all odds of logistics and hormones.
Yes, there they are at the North Pole. We weren't there, by the way, but
no, we were not in the end team, sadly, but it was a triumph shared.
Yeah.
And quite significant for you, wasn't it? Because for several of us, but not many, you and myself and some others, it wasn't enough. It had ignited something within us. And you then went on as the next chapter on an expedition to the South Pole, which was different this time.
You're right. It lit a fire in me, and I felt like I'd found what I was meant to do for the rest of my life. The rest of my life.
So right.
Yeah, and I know, and we got together, and there were 5 of us, and it's probably poignant or fair to say there originally was 6, and the fates of life was that Jan had an accident, got knocked off her bike, crushed her wrist just before the expedition, which then meant that 5 of us decided to take on Antarctica, the windiest, highest, coldest continent on Earth, where all the winds are katabatic, so they start at the South Pole and come down into our faces. And that's 700 miles of skiing. But it's 700 miles on a continent, a huge continent where all the wildlife is on the edge, and nothing lives inside. So as we know, we did 61 days not seeing another living thing or moving. We saw a few mountains, occasional, the best being the Thiel. Yeah. And that was it. And it was just wave upon wave upon wave of ice.
It was, wasn't it? There was a sort of monastic quality about crossing, because it's mental endurance, isn't it? It was less physical, perhaps, than the Arctic, although it certainly took its physical toll. And did you feel, Anne, that in any way it prepared you for a solo expedition? Because we were so hermetically sealed in our clothing from the wind. I mean, Darth Vader masks, the work. There was no communication, or not much to speak of, during the marching day.
I haven't thought about that. That's that is really good. And I think you are probably right, because it was an expedition where you were on your own for a huge amount of the day, because you were skiing along, and we were skiing one behind the other. That's the quickest way of doing it. So we weren't talking until we got a break. And then sometimes we'd sit down exhausted and we had to eat and drink, and of course we talked, but sometimes we were just busy doing what we had to do, and then we were off. So I think that's probably right. You had to get used to dealing with your inner feelings and having conversations for hours on end to yourself.
So you have to have a theatrical stage in your mind. And you mentioned there about how we all marched in a line, and one of the reasons for that was safety, because of crevasses, of course. Would you like to explain, if you can remember, because it all seems quite a long time ago now, how to, if there's any contrast, because quite often there was just zero, it was like being in a ping pong ball. But if you could see, how would you tell a crevasse, because they were often filled with snow?
Yeah, I can remember clearly when we set off from the very edge from Hercules Inlet. There were small crevasses, but because the wind had blown so much, you might think that they'd be full. But it actually, we skied across some bald blue ice, which was quite slippy. Which haha. But because it was uphill, it was tricky.
Yeah.
And I thought they were really easy to see, even if they weren't, because you could see them, and they were quite regular, but they were quite small. As we got further in further into the central, they were obviously bigger. What I what you could see was almost a vague change in the colour of the snow. So as you see it all laid out ahead of you there might be just a change in colour, and that gave you an impression, or just a slight dip. And you could maybe see two or three ahead, or to the left or right of you, and you thought, oh, that looks like a crevasse area. And obviously we came across a very big one ourselves. I remember that, where we had to rope up and get across it because we
And
knew.
you and I raced to be the first to go over.
Yeah, I do remember that too.
There was another occasion which was quite spiritual, dare I say. Do you remember? I was at that particular stage leading the navigation, and we were in a complete whiteout, and you were behind me, and you were being Bernie. And let me explain. We had.
I was say you should explain what Bernie is.
You look down at your compass, you look up, and you almost immediately go, of course. So the person behind would co-navigate, like Bernie the Bold in the Golden Shot, wasn't it? And shout left a bit, right a bit. Anyway, I was making a right mess of it in the whiteout. I was going all over the place, and you were going left, left, right, right. And in my mind, because imagine you can't even see the tips of your ski, you can't see up or down or left, right. In my mind, suddenly this hand was coming up like this and going repeatedly, no, no. And I thought, what? This is hopeless. I kept going to the side. And I think I was really upsetting everyone. So in the end, I stopped. And I turned around and said, Anne, handing you the compass, will you please take over the navigating? I just don't seem to be doing a good job of it. And as we literally exchanged the compass, suddenly there was a tiny window in the sky, and this ray of sunshine came through and illuminated straight ahead a crevasse.
It's odd, isn't it? Yes, I do. It's
I still
very
had
odd.
to do the compass.
But those moments, I became spiritual for the first time. I'd never understood really spiritualism. What on earth do people talk? What do they mean? All that hocus pocus. I didn't get it. It wasn't. I just didn't understand it. When I was in Antarctica, I understood it. I became spiritual. I began to feel things that weren't necessarily tangible or that you could see, and it stayed with me. That feeling, it was a great gift that Antarctica gave me.
You felt a great on Antarctica. There was a sort of proximity, isn't there, to this great force, this sense of friendly, warm power, and protection.
And also, so you've got all nature, all, whether it's a really bad day and it's cold and you've got wind attacking you and you can't see anything, or whether it's a beautiful day, it's you and nature. And then, of course, you haven't got the distractions during the day. Well, even at night, I know we had jobs to do. You have to take your position and all those things, and cook and the jobs. But during the day, there's no TV. there's no music. So I didn't take any music with me. There's no distractions. There's no other colours. You're not walking down the street and seeing things or buildings or people. There was nothing but the beauty of Antarctica and
Yes.
nature. And
Yes.
I think that was helped us to get in tune with Mother Earth,
You
because we
travel,
weren't
don't you, on
distracted.
many levels, because you're traveling physically, mentally, and spiritually. And the way you described it as well is very similar to those of the people who are listening. That if you joined us for Ros Savage, who's a world solo rower, that she had very much similar experience spiritually, in terms of just being out there in this vast seascape with no music and tuning in a very different way. But we made it, Anne. We made it. I think we got there on my birthday to the geographic South Pole.
We did. It was
We did.
just so timely, and it was the millennium.
And it was
It
the
wasn't. It
millennium.
wasn't eve of the millennium, but
And
we
you
set off
lost.
in '99, and it was in 2000.
Yeah, it was great. We could eat
That
lots of
was.
cake, which the scientists kindly made for us, because we'd lost so much weight. But other than that, we were actually in very good nick, weren't we? I mean, we were weak.
Oh, we
We were in good
were.
condition. And you were the only person who, after 2 months, hadn't washed their hair, that looked good. Your hair looked amazing, which proved the Elizabethan theory of not washing your hair too often.
It's because it was shorter as well. And then, do you remember they gave us a bottle of champagne or a glass? We had a glass each. I don't know. They'd saved us champagne because at the South Pole there is an American scientific base, and they were really beautiful. They invited us in and they took us to their little bar. We had to walk up some stairs, which we all fell up because we'd only skied for 60 days. We'd forgotten how to walk,
Like Daleks.
how to actually walk upstairs. And I had, I think, half a glass of champagne and I could hardly walk.
We were all
Hardly
absolutely
walk.
puzzled.
So drunk. But I just remember thinking the generosity of those people, because everything they've got, they don't have much, and they can't get things flowing in and out. That they shared this bottle of champagne that must have been really precious
Yes.
with us. So
Yes.
nice.
It was, and then we turned, and it was interesting actually, because as everyone's probably tuning in, there are a lot of similarities between Anne and myself, and I think the similarities sort of dovetailed us into hatching the same next plan. But life went at that stage in a different direction for you, didn't it? With the arrival of another family teammate, shall we say?
Well, there was two things that happened. I actually did another expedition. That's when I put the expedition together to do land to the North Pole, and it was so I three. There was a team of 3 women, and we went to the North Pole in 2002. But then after that one, I had a new husband. Well, we weren't married. I had a new man, and we had another child, a little baby. And she was a joy. When she was one, I was asked to guide a last degree expedition of men. There was 10 multinational men, so I was leading it. And I'd had to step in for this Royal Marine who couldn't do it. So they were expecting this huge, burly Royal Marine, and I stepped in last minute, which they were slightly horrified with, but after a while they accepted that everything was great. I knew what I was doing, and we got
Unlike
there.
on the selection course.
Yeah, like that.
Yes.
And it was her birthday when I was out on the ice. And it was, she's never let me forgive it. I told her once, your first birthday, I wasn't even there. But that's when I hatched the plot, the plot. I want to do this. If I could, that was what did it. If I can lead 10 blocks, and I can pull as much weight as they can and can perform, I can do this thing. Apparently not, but I thought I could.
I can remember when I toddled off solo to the South Pole, which is when you were ancient with Sarah, I think. So I rang the team to honorably tell them that's what I had planned. And you went, oh, I was thinking of doing that. It's just that I'm pregnant at the moment. Fine. And then you you did this amazing expedition, which was your idea, initiated by you with Pom Oliver and Caroline Hamilton, to go to the North Pole as the first ever all British women team to go all the way, of full endurance.
Yeah.
And it was an excruciatingly difficult journey, triumphant, but very difficult. You had some real issues. Tell us about the storm and then Pom.
Oh, it was horrific. Sorry, it just was horrific. I had been in 97 when it was -30, and I knew that was quite a shorter expedition. So once again, because I've noticed somebody has asked, with the 3 children, my parents moved into my house so I could to do this big expedition, because we'd done the expedition in a relay to the North Pole, but no women's team had gone without new members being brought in to the North Pole. So we set off in 2002, and for the first 27 days, temperatures on the thermometer were between -46 and -58. And that's not, oh, it was -20 and let's just add a few for good measure, because it was tracked and proven. We don't again know what it was with wind chill, because our anemometers, everything froze. So if you think and our sledges were heavier because we were out there longer, it was just the most awful time. Everything froze. Our faces froze. Our kit froze. And we were traveling in really slowly with really heavy sledges. We had to take care of each other. It was just foul.
And did it not very early on, or was it later on, you had this terrific storm?
Yeah, so we had some storms, but then it was about day 7. That's just as soon as it was. It might be an 8, 9, or 10. I'd have to really check. But we had this storm, and this storm hit us really quickly. And the kind of storm where you have to put your tent up and get in. But of course, to put a tent up on the Arctic Ocean, you have to find a piece of ice that will take you and that you can put the tent up. Because if you're traveling in broken ice like that, you can't put a tent on it. The ice is all mashed. You have to find a pan of ice. By the time we'd found a pan of ice, the wind was so much, we knew we'd have trouble putting the tent up. So we attached it to Pom Oliver, Pom, before we took it out the back. Because if the wind gets the tent and it takes it off, then you're in trouble. So we deemed if we attached it to Pom and then took it out the back, it would, she'd hold it down and we could get it up. The wind was so much, it almost acted like a kite. She was attached to her sledge and pulled her and hit her against a pressure ridge. So that was already a bit of an incident. We knew we would not get the tent up. So we just put it on the floor, the material, just like that, and then weighted it down with our sledges and crawled underneath it in our bags, which by then were frozen anyway, with the moisture from the cooking and various other things. And we lay there for 3 days. 3 days next to each other without it being up. We couldn't cook, we couldn't boil water, we couldn't use the phone. We didn't know when it was going to stop, and we lay there for 3 days. Even the wind was so high, even talking we couldn't do. We had to yell, "Are you okay?"
How did you?
That was awful.
I mean, that was a real killer, and I have to intercede with a very basic, but actually pertinent question from Emma, saying very politely, great spirited ladies, can you tell us how you managed to answer the call of nature since you had layers of clothing on? Now, can we elaborate that, if that's all right, Emma, to particularly in that circumstance?
That circumstance, none of us went to the toilet for 3 days.
I suppose you were dehydrated.
We didn't drink anything. We had a little bit of water each that we'd got with us. We'd had a problem during the night where the ice had broken and we'd had to move. So it was just after that we hadn't had time to fill the water bottles
Yes.
things that happened. So we still had half an Algene each, and some nuts and some basic nuts and chocolate, small amount. That's all we had with us, and we couldn't go out to the sledges. We just couldn't go out of this material, and we didn't go for 3 days. We didn't want to go.
Yeah.
And I can.
Was it as a result of that 3 days pinned under your tent in the storm that Pom got gangrene through frost?
Yes. So this is sort of us coming out. You can kind of see, oh gosh, I've now banged. I have a green screen behind me, and I've got to be careful I don't move because I'm going to knock it. We came out, and when we came out, we just laid there, and Pom had really bad frostbitten feet from that. Caroline she had frostbitten fingers, and as the day goes on, which you know yourself, you can get infection. So she got infection. I mean, I am, she skied on badly frostbitten feet for such a long time. And she skied on those feet just to keep the expedition alive, because we had a resupply on day 47. She knew she'd have to leave on that resupply plane. That, there was no question of it. She'd have lost her foot.
Yes.
So unfortunately, Pom had to leave.
Courage. Yeah.
She's my hero, and she has always been my hero, and her spirit and her ability to keep going through all that, knowing that she'd have to leave, was just courage at its best. She's my biggest hero.
The ultimate sacrifice, really.
The ultimate sacrifice. She's courageous, she's wonderful. She's my biggest hero.
And thanks to Pom's input, as much as all of you as a team, you made it to the geographic North Pole. So you, Anne, were the first woman to reach both geographic poles. Yeah,
as all women's teams.
Yeah,
we were.
Yes, in what's otherwise really normally a man's world, I have to say. But anyway,
and it was. Yeah. And I think that's an interesting point. In those days, and the same, because you were out there doing it. You were out there, went to the Solar, the South Pole. You were out there doing all that stuff. And in those days, there were not many women doing it. There definitely weren't mothers. That was also a thing.
All our kit was bespoke, really, by dint of having to. Made for men. And then you did something. We both did something that no other woman would even, certainly in those days anyway, thought about, which was going back to the North Pole.
What the hell were we thinking of?
On our own. On several occasions, I might add. Now, this is actually quite interesting because we don't have much time, but it's your North Pole bid was the same as mine in terms of value to your life, and also you although it was undertaken differently, because you might just quickly explain where you set off from, in contrast to where I set off from, and what you encountered and why the expedition at the end of the day meant so much to you.
But yeah, I will try and do it quickly. I left from the Russian end because sponsorship being what it was, I don't think anybody was coming in much for a woman with triplets going on her own. So I didn't have the funding to go from Canada, which was twice as much money in those days. So I left from Russia, and it's different from there. There's more open water, but not as many ridges. It goes towards the pole. So it's a very different environment, but you're also dealing with people who have a different culture to you, and it's just a very different experience. And I set off terrified, but full of every joy of the Arctic Ocean, being on my own. I really did enjoy and loved. I had 5 encounters with polar bears, which was a great honor. I didn't get hurt, they didn't get hurt, so it was just the perfect type of encounter. And then after 21 days, when I called Ian Wesley, my base manager, he told me, and I have no proof of any of it, he told me that my permits had been removed, because you have to have permits, and I needed Russian permits because I was leaving the Russian from Russian territories. They were being removed, and I could no longer carry on. And there was 2 other expeditions on the ice, different parts of the ice. And so physically, an Mi-8 Russian helicopter came and picked the first expedition up. They then flew to me and picked me up, and then flew to the 3rd expedition on the ice and picked them up. There's nothing we could do about that.
This
And
is
I
a
was
bitter blow.
it was a big blow, especially as I was full of, I'm really on this. I've gone 175 miles in 21 days. I was full of the joys of the possibilities.
Mm, mm.
But and I was devastated. But by the time I got out, I was all right. I just thought, you don't know if you'd have made it, Anne. You could have died tomorrow. What if you'd have shot a polar bear the next day? I would never have forgiven myself. What if the
Mm.
polar bear had got me, or had gone in? They may have
Yes,
saved my life. You don't know they stopped
I
you
agree with
leaving
you
it,
totally, Anne.
you
The
know?
bitter pill when I too was picked up because the ice was disappearing, it was gone. That's how I came to terms with it, that maybe had I gone on, I would have just disappeared through the ice. And
Yeah.
we all have little sort of symbols to remind us of this, and I think you've got one around your neck.
I absolutely do. And so I had a few scary moments with polar bears. So when I came back, I made this. I had it made to remind me that the most frightening challenges, if we get through them, can be our greatest memories and our greatest joys. And it reminds me that, even if it's
Ah,
just going on stage to speak
that
and I'm
is
nervous.
can we end on that note? Because it is
Yeah.
just such a beautiful, strong message to us all, myself included. And we have precious little time because you and I have talked so much to answer some of the really good questions that are coming in. But first and foremost, I must say that there's a lot of wonderful messages directed to Pom, saluting her courage and also concern that she recovered,
She did.
which she did, and she's actually done expeditions with me again since. And I hope that you and Pom and I will do some stuff.
Me too.
Um,
I think it might have to be warm for Pom, but we can do that too.
we can do the other extreme, can we
Yes.
not? Okay, so there's the obvious question. I don't know if you can answer this shortly, but it seems so dangerous, says Claire Truscott, especially solo. She has to ask you why.
Well, because it does seem so dangerous, but we didn't just go off, wake up one morning and go to the ends of the earth danger. We had gone through many expeditions and became professional at what we did, understood the ice, understood what we were doing. And I believe that the children always, if I find a difficult piece of ice, I will ask myself, can I look myself in the ice if I'm going to cross it? So they were my barometer for whether I took a risk or not. And honestly, I was twice, once I'd been knocked off the M6 by a large articulate lorry that crashed my car, and how I got out, I don't know. And second, I slipped on the path at home and ended up with a severe head injury that I
Yeah.
was in hospital for a very long time. And so I think, what do we do? Do we wrap ourselves up in cotton wool? And that's not for me. I have to live life. I want to live life. We don't have to do anything. And I want to teach my children to live life. How can I say, do your best life? Don't be afraid of challenging yourself if
Yeah.
I'm not prepared to do it. So
And in
that's my
fact,
why.
and on that note, your children all grew up very happy. I know Suri, who's always asking good questions, was asking about your triplets and how do you manage when you're away, or how do they manage? But they were always looked after with love and care as well, weren't they? By
The
your
family, my parents took care of them. They moved in and took over their lives. So they didn't ever, their lives didn't change, and they loved their grandma and granddad. That was special. They're
yeah.
28 now, and I have a 19-year-old. And I've asked them now as adults, where did it, be honest, and they are honest, we're old and we get on. They loved it. They lived the life they had. They felt loved at all times and cared for. So I'm all right
They're
with
very
that.
proud of the legacy that you have carved for them.
Yeah, what more could
I
you
think
ever
we have
ask?
time for one more question, Anne, which is a really wonderful, probably a cliffhanger to end on, which is anonymous, but it's, do you have anything planned next?
I do. Well, obviously we're going to have to do something, but Martin,
Obligatory.
yeah, the beautiful Martin Hartley, who I've been on a lot of scientific expeditions with, is putting together an expedition to find the last of the remaining multi-year ice on Arctic Ocean. So it hasn't melted in summer and it gets bigger in winter. The Arctic Ocean, since mankind has known, so definitely I would say for 200,000 years, has had multi-year ice. It is going to disappear in the next few years and will be gone, no more. So we will go and find it. We'll be told where it is with satellites, and we're working with the European Space Agency, NASA, and various other companies. We'll be told where it is. We will find it. We will take samples. We will document it. We will photograph it. We're taking a scientist, and we will document and bring back data for the last remaining evidence, for the last remaining.
Oh, Anne, I really salute you on that, and I think it is quite remarkable that you've managed to show us, well, you're living proof that if you have a dream, nothing is going to stop you if you really want to reach that dream, and that you can make out of it this wonderful, rich legacy for everyone else, particularly with your environmental and scientific work that you're doing now, which is very important, very valuable to the planet, and ergo us all as well. And you have a list that stretches as far as the North Pole of really good questions, and like training and this, that, the other, and lots of clapping and applause out there. So, Anne, I'll round it up because of course we've gone over time. I'd like to thank you all. I'd like to thank everyone for their very kind comments and good questions, and Anne for just being great company. We've got to continue.
Thank you.
God bless you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.